learned, it gets like really awkward, and
Yep.
it'll tell you you're not live yet, but you're actually live.
Yeah. My wife did a show like that. And it was I think there was like at least 3 to 4 minute delay.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's something like that.
Yeah.
Okay, so we are officially live.
All right.
My name is Taylor Colmis, and I am the education coordinator here at Clark County Historical Association. Today, I have with me Joseph Jablonski. I just butchered his last name, but it's
Nope,
okay.
that was perfect.
He is with us today, and he's going to be talking about writing machines, and he's going to have a presentation for us. And then at the end, we are going to be taking some Q&A at the end. So if anybody has any questions, please feel free to put them in the comments and we will answer it at the end. So go take it away, Joseph.
Thank you so much. So my name is Joseph Jablonski. I do street poetry on the Winchester Walking Mall in Winchester, Virginia. That is how I really started to kind of come into my own when it came to these writing machines, typewriters, whatever you would like to call them. I forgot my first typewriter when I was 13. I was a kid. Back then, I think it was like $5 at an antique sale. It was actually a church sale. And it was intriguing that there was this way of creating words that was not just through a magical printer that prints off sheets with the, with ink that I can't see and circuitry that's kind of weird and wonky and doesn't work half the time. It was a Olympiette was the name of the typewriter. It's Olympiette. It was made around 1970s. I don't have it with me now. It turns out I'm traveling, so I only have some machines. But it was so intriguing to look at that mechanism and kind of go, how was this the way that the world worked? How is it that we didn't have ways to backspace or copy and paste in the typical electronic fashion? And when I later on, when I got a little older and I started doing some poetry on the Winchester Walking Mall, I started to learn more about these machines. Basically, I had one machine. I was like, well, this machine's nice, but I'd like a few more so that I can kind of rotate them and show people different machines. And what you learn quickly about typewriter collecting and typewriters in general is that they tend to be very inexpensive, but also amazingly cool at the same time. So sure enough, I built up a collection of about 30 machines, which is just absurd, but not absurd by most collectors' standards. And you'll be seeing some of the machines today. And when I started collecting them and then started getting interesting in the history, in the different designs, the styles, how those styles came to be, I started really asking what is behind this? How did these machines come to be? And while I'm not like a professor or an expert, I have learned as a collector what it means to what typewriting was to the world. What typewriting was to the world is like what you're doing right now. You're using a computer, you're using your phone, you might have a printer attached to your computer or your monitor. We take these technologies for granted. But back in the day, it was very similar. A typewriter seat was just something that you had in the home. Maybe not as early on, but later on, it was just a machine that you used to be able to create letters and correspondence, keep in touch with your family, just like you use your phone. And so at the time, people were kind of like, it's a new machine, here's a new machine, this and that. And companies had to do some pretty interesting things, which we'll talk about, to try to market and get more machines out on the market. And so there's always a bit of marketing and business to that. But now we can take a look at these machines in a light that we haven't before because nobody uses them, nobody needs them, and we can just look at them for almost the aesthetic beauty, the nostalgia. How many of you have gone to a writing thing or seen anything involving a writers or authors and seen a picture of a typewriter blown up? There's a romanticism to these machines, and some of the machines I'll be showing you today, you might have seen, you might not have seen, but all of them in some way or another represent the work of writing. So I'm going to get started by showing a PowerPoint, and we're going to kind of dip between the PowerPoint and some of my actual machines, which I'll be able to demonstrate on camera for you. So if you give me a second, I'm going to bring up my PowerPoint and doing the Zoom screen switcheroo. Share screen. And we are golden. So this is Typewriters, A Collector's History. Now, not all the machines you're going to see in these photos are mine. Actually, I think most of the ones that are going to be in the photos and the slideshow I'm showing you because they aren't mine. They're machines that I have seen other collectors collect. They are, you know, just amazingly different styled machines. And while you might have this image of a typewriter in your mind, get ready because your mind's about to be blown. Let's make sure this works. There we go. So the first machines ever invented were the Scholes and Glidden on the right side in 1876, and then the Hansen writing ball on the left. This picture is a picture I took it myself at a typewriter museum that is made by the name of a man named Herman Price. He has a collection of over 800 machines, all the various different types, styles, unique designs. The Hansen writing ball on the left of your screen is a replica, but the Scholes and Glidden typewriter on the right is an actual 1876 design typewriter. I believe it has been restored. So the Scholes and Glidden typewriter was generally, it may have been bought after and manufactured by, or at a certain point it was part of, or ended up becoming into the Remington company. Now you may know Remington for their guns. Remington had, you know, manufactured rifles. I think there was a Remington revolver that they had. But the great thing about being, say, a gun company or any other company that worked with small mechanics was that you were ready and able to be able to work with the small mechanics of typewriters. The machine on the left, the Hansen writing ball, was actually, I believe it was designed over in Europe, but its main claim to fame is that it is the machine that Nietzsche wrote some of his books on, the philosopher Friedrich Nietzsche. And that's reaching back into the 1870s and 1880s. When you look at these machines, you can see that they're kind of weird. There's covers on top of the Scholes and Glidden, so you can't necessarily access the keyboard unless you lift up that cover. The design is very Victorian on the Scholes and Glidden, which reveals a lot about how these typewriters were very much emblematic of that time period. There was a machine with decoration instead of just being something that was extremely practical or mass produced. It was very artistic, but also in many ways very inaccurate. Part of the challenge with that, and I'm now showing you a machine called the Remington No. 2, is if you look at this machine, you're going to notice that right on like the front, and I think I actually have a way to maybe do a little bit of annotation here. Right here, you kind of got like this here. It's more what is not there. You don't see a place where you can see the keys hit the keyboard. And yes, so both in the Scholes and Glidden typewriter and the Hansen writing ball and the Remington typewriter, these early typewriters, you could not see what you were writing as you were writing them. When you're traditionally think of a typewriter, and we're going to get to our staple typewriter soon, you think of a typewriter where you can see the writing in front of you, the paper kind of curls up. But in these early typewriters, you actually had to grab that lever on the right, this lever right over here. I'm actually going to use my finger to draw it, to be able to lift the entire carriage, the paper roller and everything up, to be able to see what you were writing. And then you'd have to put it back down and you'd have to keep typing on it. These machines were called upstroke machines because when you press the keys on the keyboard, the keys would lift up and smack the platen from underneath. And it would kind of just do this type of thing all day long. And again, you'd have to lift it up, check to see what your writing looks like, lift it back down. This was around the time as well that our QWERTY design came to be. If we go back to that Hansen writing ball, you can see that was definitely not a QWERTY design. I hope I can get I have to go back to the mouse here. You can see right here that this is not, that on the left side, that's not a QWERTY design. The letters are just sporadically placed all over the place. There were some typewriters, which I don't unfortunately have pictures of here, that actually really played around with the experimentation in terms of keyboard designs, where there would be instead of the typical 26 letters, it would be doubled, and you would have one key for a capital and one key for lowercase. There was even a typewriter designed that I even got to try. I didn't have a picture of, but I got to try at a friend's museum, where it was called a duplex, and it was meant to be more efficient because you would type 2 letters at the same time. And the machine required that you pressed one key and another key, and then it would type both letters, and then you'd be going around like this all day long, which was just crazy. I can't imagine anybody doing something like that. So obviously, it became important for typewriter designers to start showing people to be able to see what they were typing. I'm sure their complaints departments were probably a little overwhelmed at this point with, hey, I'm writing something and I'm typing along, and then I find out there's something wrong with it. That's when we started getting into some visible typewriters. So it's around the 1890s that you start seeing a lot of advertisements advertising and encouraging for visible typewriters. But at the same time, this was still a very unique time in the typewriter's history. Everybody was trying to design a different way, the best way for a typewriter to become the true, what we would ultimately become the typical typewriter design. And so it was a time of innovation. It was a time of creativity. It was a time of absolute uniqueness, because it was just all these different designs that were floating around. The one that I have pictured now is one of my absolute favorite designs that I've ever seen. It's the Foru Typewriter. It has our QWERTY layout. It also has some keys where you can switch between figures and capitals. I'm going to kind of demonstrate how that looks in a second. But the thing that makes this typewriter stand out is, look at that cover right there. The wrought iron. I don't know the exact name of that design on the metal, but the fact is you don't even need to know. It is a beautiful, intricate lattice that is meant to really call out to people that want to buy this machine that this is an artistic machine. This machine didn't end up actually doing well, though, on the market. And by the way, as a little side note, the Ford typewriter is not related at all to Henry Ford. There's a couple of coincidences in terms of that in the typewriter community. There's a Mercedes typewriter that has nothing to do with Mercedes, that like the typical companies that we know. It just happened to be similar names. This typewriter used a thrust stroke, meaning that keys that would, whenever you would press down on a key, I'm going to get my drawback. I think there's a way to still do the drawing, but whenever you would press down on a key, I want to do this right, it would just thrust straight at the paper. It's a terrible arrow I just drew, but it would thrust straight at the paper, just kind of shoot out. Now we know, because if we've seen a typewriter before, even just once, that there's hammers. It kind of goes up like this. It's a typical way of typing. But these typewriters shot straight out like a thrust action. Now, all typewriters at this time were actually designed that way. But of course, there was a little more creativity in terms of what could be designed. And also at the same time, it became a business issue, because if one company patented a way to design a keystroke, another company couldn't copy that. Otherwise, there would be lawsuits left and right. So companies started getting really creative. And that is when we're going to switch to an actual machine that I have, and I'm going to be able to demonstrate for you. And I'm going to stop the sharing. And you should see now in front of you an Oliver number 9. So this Oliver number 9, which I have, you see, it's actually there, is a machine that was made in 1918. This machine particularly was made in 1918, but it hovers around that same time frame as the Ford and the Remington number 2. It was another machine that was advertised as a visible machine, but unlike the typical typewriters that we have today, this machine uses a downstroke. And so as a typer, you're kind of staring down at the center section here, looking at your words. Your words do disappear under these 2 towers of keys. This typewriter has been likened akin to a bat wing design as well as a butterfly. It is such a unique typewriter, but it is also, and I'm going to get a piece of paper to demonstrate, an extremely loud typewriter. An extremely loud typewriter. Let me get this paper in here. There we go. Now this typewriter does work. I spent a little bit of time, I'm not going to use the word restoring, but I definitely refurbished it. Got the platen cleaned up and everything. This typewriter was bought in Long Island, New York, and you can't see it, but this typewriter has keys so that that a pharmacist could write a prescription. So I'm going to do a little typing now just to kind of demonstrate what this looks like. Listen to that clunking sound. Now this typewriter has a lot of innovation that I absolutely love about it. So the first thing that you kind of see here is that it has this weird shift mechanism. So like many other typewriters at the time, it used three rows on each key, with the keys being here, to kind of do three different characters for each letter. One was a lowercase, one was a capital, and then one was a figure. So if I press down this button, and then I start typing, and I actually can put a caps lock on there, I get capital letters. And then if I release that and then press this down, it moves the carriage the other direction. And now I'm just typing symbols. So again, it was another unique design that was all about trying to change the way that people thought about how they had to type, and another innovative way for people to visibly see the words that they were typing. Around this time, some of the typical typewriters, what we now know as the standard typewriter, were being designed. So this one kind of was working against that, trying to stifle through some competition. One thing about this typewriter that I want to show you guys, which I think is one of the coolest things, is that this typewriter is a good example of how many typewriters, like many good machines, were designed to be repaired, because repairmen knew that likely a machine, if it was being used, especially with all this exposed, I'm going to take the machine, turn it to the side, with all of this exposed paper there, with all of that exposed mechanics, there you go, right? It's going to be very often, these are going to get gunked up at there. It's going to need to be cleaned. It's, a piece of paper could get stuck and, and mess with the gears. So the people that designed this typewriter wanted to design a typewriter that was very easily able to be taken apart in some basic ways to be repaired. Now, obviously, there's some screws that you could take off over here, but what I'm going to show you now is probably going to blow your mind. Ready? Watch this. And there we go. So now I have not just damaged the machine. What I have done is I have removed the carriage from the machine so that the inner workings over here and the inner workings of this carriage, which you can see flipped over here, would be very easily able to be accessed without having to take off a single screw. When I first came across this on this typewriter, I had to repair the drawband on it, which is basically the spring that keeps the carriage moving. I was absolutely astounded. These were people that didn't have any computers, didn't have any way of designing something on AutoCAD or whatever to be able to consider a design like this or any other software. And they knew and foresaw the need to be able to remove this carriage, probably because this is Oliver number 9. There were several other iterations of this typewriter before. They knew what was important for this machine, and they had it baked into the design from the start. And so that is the Oliver number 9, circa 1918. I'm going to put the carriage right back just so you guys know that I didn't actually break this machine. And there we go. And once again, back to typing. So give me a second. I'm going to switch back to our PowerPoint. Is that my video? And then there we go. So as I kind of said, another, these mechanical innovations continue to develop, but one stood out from the rest, and that was the Hammond. The Hammond typing machine was a machine that used shuttles. That's the right word for it. Different typeface shuttles that could be very easily pulled in and out of the typewriter to be able to make changing typefaces really, really easy. Some of you older folks, if you're watching, may be thinking, wow, that's something I might have seen on a Selectric or two. We'll get to that later, but this was where the technology started in the late 1800s, early 1900s. And it changed. It was a very different design. And this design still survived through the typewriter wars. And the Hammond Typewriter Company in various levels always created a writing machine. What I'm going to show you now is a picture of me typing on one of these machines. I was at a typewriter jubilee last year and was able to type on a 1908 Hammond. This machine is 112 years old at this point. So it has been restored, of course, but it is amazing to see the type of technology in action in a very clear video, clearer than sometimes my webcam can be, that was inside of a typewriter at this time. So you'll see there what it's doing is it has a shuttle that moves back and forth when you press down a key. At the same time as the shuttle moving back and forth, in the back where you see that bell moving, it has a hammer that actually pushes the paper up against the ink spool and imprints the character backwards compared to a usual typewriter. You're getting a great view of what that mechanism is looking like in the back. And the keyboard arrangement was slightly different, so I was obviously going through a bit of a learning curve. This is not my machine. It was a machine of a friend of mine that he was lending me to show me to use. It was just amazing to be able to see such old technology in motion. And I was typing a poem on it. And I think the typeface was like this Gothic looking typeface. It was so cool. Had backspace feature, had a little tray where the paper goes in, but it just goes to show that there were so many different innovative technologies being experimented with at this time. Now, my goal is one day to be able to take a machine like this out onto the walking wall and throw some poems down on a machine that's even older than my own Oliver. Oh, there we go. So now we move on to some of the more typical typewriters that we have seen. This is a picture of an Underwood 5. I actually have two different Underwood 5s. Both of them are in various stages of pieces because I'm trying to restore them. So I could not show you pictures of mine. But the Underwood number 5 really took the typewriter world by storm. If there were any winner in the typewriter wars of the standard typewriters at this time, it would be probably this one. This was your Chevy of the typewriters. It was manufactured in millions of numbers, very typically designed, and the Underwood Company kept this design way into the 50s for all of their standard typewriters that they had. The typewriter uses a typical upstroke motion to kind of just bring those keys up against the platen. This typewriter is iconic. You're probably looking at this and you were saying, I've seen this typewriter before, and you probably have. When it came around time for World War II, many typewriters that people had, Underwood standard typewriters, number 5s and number 6s, which were just very similar, would actually surrender their typewriters to the Army voluntarily to help with the war effort. It's one of the most amazing things I've learned about these typewriters is many of them were used during the war, World War II, that is. And so that's kind of the time period we're looking at here, kind of 20s to 30s to 40s at this point. Now I'm going to bring in another one of my machines. So if the Underwood typewriter is the Chevy, this is the Cadillac. And what I'm going to show you is I'm going to show you a very customized and very interesting Royal 10. So give me a second. I've got to pause here. Start video. There we go. Another typewriter machine. So this one is probably pretty similar to what you might have seen as well. This is a 1928 Royal 10. These machines were originally sold and painted in black, but this machine was customized. Now you're looking at this and you might be thinking, wow, you know, that's a pretty good spray paint job. Well, it's not a spray paint job. This typewriter, at a certain point in its life, I do not know when, ended up getting repainted in a store that existed on 127 South Braddock Street. That's right, this is a local boy. This typewriter was probably a hardworking machine, and at a certain point, its owner wanted to maybe get a nice paint job for it. It's this teal, this metallic teal color. These here on the side are actually glass panels that were painted right over. They even, as you can see, painted right over the bell as well, which I find to be kind of comical because I think that the bell should always have that glistening silver or black sheen to it. You can see the other panel here. So this machine has spent its whole life probably in the Winchester area. And this is something that I've been getting into more as a collector personally, is what are the machines? What is the history of typewriting in the Shenandoah Valley? And I hope one day to be able to answer that question in greater detail. So this machine, very similar to the Underwood, we're kind of getting out of the wonky mechanics of it. Uses just a simple front stroke to be able to type with the ribbon exposed. You can remove the ribbon by kind of taking these panels off of here. Very hard to kind of access the mechanics on this one, but every once in a while you could just probably lift up the typewriter and kind of see underneath. So you don't have a good view on that. So let me bring it up a little closer. Kind of see all the little different levers that are going on there. And that's the Royal 10. These machines, when they are when they're taken care of, cleaned and maintenance, they type like any writing machine in just like with a smooth, careful, wonderful action. They are just a great machine to be writing on. And so these Royal 10s also were very prevalent in offices, but because of the kind of the larger design, the stronger build, the smoother quality of it, these machines were a little more sought after when it came to their mechanics. And that is the Royal 10. I am going to go back to my screen share. Start video, screen sharing. What I'm going to get into now is we're going to kind of take a couple of steps back, and we're going to talk about portable typewriters now. So every machine that I've showed you so far was a machine that was meant to sit on a desk. You get the machine, it sits on a desk, you leave it when you leave it, and you come back to it when you come back to it. But around the late 1800s to 1900s, people were even designing portable carryable machines. The first widespread portable machine was this odd looking thing. This doesn't look like a typewriter at all. In fact, it just looks like a bunch of metal levers sticking out of a carriage. It was a very bare bones design, which was extremely impressive at the time, and it is called a Blickensderfer. The Blickensderfer machine was the Blickensderfer basically just made this, and they made this for about 30 years. Various little iterations, changes. It is one of the most compact lever-based machines that is out there. But this machine, it's a little different than most other typewriters because it kind of similar to the Hammond. It uses this this kind of spinning ball up here. Inside of the typewriter, depending on what key you press down, it activates certain springs and it twists that ball around. Rubs a little bit of ink in the specific spot where you're going to land that thing down, and then just smacks the entire cylinder right onto the paper, but only touching the one character you need. These things are really funny to watch people type on because they're just basically pecking around, and this little cylinder is just smacking the paper over and over again. But this was, you could get this before 1900 if you were obviously, wealthy enough and wanted to be able to carry around a typewriter. And then I'm actually going to go back to showing some of my typewriters. So obviously, being able to have a compact machine was very important to the individuals that were designing these early typewriters. So, like this was kind of like a little bit of weird design, what you can see now, where it basically was a bunch of keys just sticking out of a platen. But people wanted a little bit more of a solid body, but they wanted something that was still portable. And entered in the standard, I'm not going to reveal the name yet because it's a little bit of a trick, but I'm going to say it's right now, the name of this machine is officially the Corona 3. And there we go, Corona 3. I'm going to stop sharing my screen and we can take a look at our little Corona 3. This little machine is 1920 Corona 3. I bought this one up in Maryland. It is a very unique machine. This machine is currently not working, I should say that. I bought it with intent to restore it. It's in a little bit of a rough condition. But it has the mechanics generally working, which is good. So it'll be a lot that I can do in terms of kind of repairing it. This machine has, very similar to the Oliver, a double shift function. So once again, each key had 3 different characters on it, top, middle, and bottom. And if you shifted up one, you got to your capitals, and if you shifted up to a second level, you got your figures. But this machine also does something that I find amazingly extraordinary for 1920. So let me get a box. This is the box for the machine. Put the machine in here. There you go. We have our machine in the box. And then here's the top of the machine. But that ain't going to work. It's obviously, I can kind of fit it over here, but this is not, it's not fitting on top of it. So what did they do? Well, they designed the machine to fold. That's right. This machine started its life out, not necessarily this machine, but the general style of this machine started out as something called the standard folding typewriter. That way, it could be put, let me just make sure that this is obviously a little bit of a hiccup here or two if you want to get this thing to fit right. So that this machine can fit into something that is not too much larger than the size of a shoebox. That's how big that thing is. The way that the machine kind of achieves this is by having a couple of key levers over here on this part that really just plug in when you flip the thing up. And, when the spring drum is actually working, see, it types regularly, and then you can just take it and fold it back, fold it forward. This is the Corona 3 folding typewriter. So many folding typewriters were made around this time. Believe it or not, Germany made their own design, which some people say was even better quality than this one. But I love this little machine, and I love the folding mechanism of it just because I find it fascinating that an entire writing mechanism can disconnect and reconnect and just work perfectly normally. There are a lot of people that use this typewriter now. There are some deluxe versions of this typewriter that are painted like, fire engine red, crisp standout in the crowd. It's just a fun little portable machine to have. Now, this was how the Corona Typewriter Company got their start. Kind of a fitting typewriter name for the time period, unfortunately. But I'm going to put this one away for now. Obviously, the other typewriter companies had wanted to kind of get themselves into the game. And so believe it or not, the last major company to enter into the portable typewriter wars was Royal. But when they did it, they did it in a very colorful fashion, if I might say. So this here is a 1934 Royal O. There were 2 editions of the typewriter at this time. It's just missing a ribbon. I took a ribbon out of it. I'm changing the ribbon out of it. But there was a Royal O and there was a Royal P. The Royal P, believe it or not, had a typeface that was very indicative, very, very reflective of the Art Deco time period. But this typewriter has a normal typeface. This typewriter is designed to be a miniature version of the Royal 10 that we saw before. They just simply said, we have something that works, we want to keep it going, and we want to make sure that it continues to work. This is a working machine, and believe it or not, these key tops are all glass. That's something else that's really cool to highlight, that many of the machines that I have been showing you up to this point have glass key tops. What that means is that instead of having just one flat, just one flat surface, there is a metal ring that surrounds a big piece of glass under which a piece of paper sits. And that is part of the reason why, if we were to go back to these, the folding Corona, which has, believe it or not, a French keyboard. It's designed a little differently. Let me put these next to each other. You can see there's some discoloration on the keys. Interesting fact, if you ever see that discoloration on keys, it's because they just had a big pile of little paper letters in the factory, and because of the manufacturing process, different types of paper had different acidity types. So they've aged differently over time. There's nothing really special about the red keys as opposed to the white keys. But this keyboard, for whatever reason, has absolutely stood the test of time and looks amazing. Now you see that it's also this brown color. So these machines were available in Ford black, to use the term. But these machines also came in a variety of very colorful two-tone colors. And this machine is two-toned. What you're seeing here on the sides over here is actually brown, and then kind of a light tan in the middle. Brown on the sides, light tan in the middle. These machines, as portable machines, were not meant to be used at a sit-down desk in office. So who were they being marketed to? So they were not just being marketed to working men in the home or when going, place this or that. These machines were actually being marketed to women under the guise of it being something that would have been fashionable for the home. Typewriter culture has surrounding a lot of it various levels of sexism. It's just something that's important to acknowledge. Many, in the office, many women were typists, and then when it came to kind of designing these other colorful typewriters, they weren't thinking about women being, strong writers or educators. They were thinking about home decoration, and that's just simply the unfortunate fact of the historiography on it. And a historian by the name of Peter Wheel has done a lot of study into that. But that is part of the reason why we now have these colorful machines as they are today, is because it was a big marketing mechanism. How do you sell more typewriters if all your typewriters are black? Well, you just change the color of the typewriters. And someone that might have a black typewriter and is rich enough to get a second typewriter, maybe wanting to get something in, their spouse's favorite color, would get a colored typewriter. And so, we look at these machines today, we think, wow, look at all these different machines, what they do, everything like that. But the decisions that were made on why this machine or that machine looks a certain way was very much based in in just simply the marketing and trying to make a little more money and trying to make a buck. So that is the 1934 Royal. This one is actually one of my favorite machines to do street poetry on. As typewriters obviously got into the post-war era, a lot of things changed about the machines, a lot of improvements. This machine here does not have a tab mechanism. It doesn't have, we'll talk a little more about what a tab mechanism does. It does have backspace, but it's a very bare bones, just getting run machine. And I'm going to show you a little bit more of a workhorse. So this here is a 1960s Remington Letter Writer Deluxe. Now this machine, I can't get the exact year on it. I don't know what it is about Remington when they put their numbers in serial number order. I don't know what they were doing at the factory, but sure enough, it's this 1960s machine. This machine can do, and even some of the older machines had some of these functions, but this machine is a pretty good example of a machine that has a lot of different functions that have, changed over time, that have increased over time, and kind of the design changes that we're also seeing as well. So we had, when you put the 1934 Royal next to the 1960s Remington, what do you see? You see that we've now moved into some curvier features. We moved into kind of that 60s streamliner, almost spaceship-esque type of feel to it, as opposed to the 30s, we're designing a box. That change is kind of very indicative across typewriters. You start even seeing that change in the 40s and 50s with Smith Corona typewriters, with even some of the Underwoods, but this is that Remington typewriter. And also we see here that our glass key tops are now gone. Part of the challenge with glass key tops is the moment they get wet, they are ruined. So even though the other typewriters were portable, they weren't weatherable. This typewriter can take a sprinkle and it can keep going. See here the tab mechanism. What it uses is it uses these levers in the back here, these little tabs where you can actually put in where you want the typewriter to stop. And, we have a lot more of, kind of plastic on this typewriter as well. So it's at this point that typewriters kind of start getting into the kind of looking a little bit more modern, a little more modernized. But even these machines, this machine is still at its latest, maybe 51, 52 years old. So these machines still have very classic feel to them. Now, I'm going to touch a little bit on electric typewriters, and then I will be wrapped up here, Taylor. So I'm going to go back to my presentation, and I'm going to talk a little bit about how electric typewriters disrupted everything that we were just talking about. And where's my Zoom change? There we go. Stop video, share screen. So what we're looking at here, it's not the best picture, but I like this picture because this is one I took on my own of an actual IBM Selectric that was in a beauty contest, believe it or not, at one of the typewriter gatherings I was at. The IBM Selectrics were the moment that typewriters started turning into word processors. They aren't word processors yet. So a word processor, by definition, is something that can actually predict or correct without corrective tape a potential type, or it can, by predicting, using like a memory bank or something, to be able to type something out. Electric typewriters are any machines that used electric to help make it easier to type, but could not necessarily hold words in any sort of memory bank or correct any words. But you can see here what we have starting to form from the 60s, 70s onward. The computer style keyboard. This had an automatic return because the Selectrics did not go by way of a typical. They didn't go by the way of actually having a carriage that moved back and forth. They had a writing ball. One thing I didn't get to do is get a good picture of the writing of the golf ball, as they call it. I want to get one up here. So I think that this will be good to show. So what the IBM Selectric used, hold on a second. is it used this golf ball mechanism. So this here is a very zoomed in picture of the typing mechanism traveling across, instead of across the carriage, but across where the platen would be. So the paper would be sitting somewhere, if I put this here, the paper would be sitting somewhere along here, and this thing would move around, pick a key out, and would clear and would type it onto the page. Now, what does this make you think of? This should make you think of that Hammond that we saw before. And that's one of the most intriguing things about the IBM Selectric. There were a lot of really new technologies that were able to take this this machine with the being able to find the variety of characters and be able to pick the right one, which I'm gonna pause the share now. But the fact of the matter is it was, let me just want to go back to my PowerPoint. There we go. Actually, I go back to here and I just close that out. Okay, hold on a second. And we're back to the PowerPoint, to the IBM Selectric. And so it was taking what was actually literally nearly half a century old technology and reapplying it in a way that really just changed the faces of offices forever. From the point that the IBM Selectric is introduced, it is probably like a decade or two before most corporate offices are just Selectrics and just Selectric typewriters. It was more efficient. It was less, it was less complicated. It was like the difference between, working with a word processor and working with a computer. It was a leap jump in efficiency. But not all, the IBM had the patent on the writing ball, but not all companies, obviously kind of gave up the fight on that. Some companies, they learned how to create electric typewriter designs using the typical front stroke key mechanism that we were looking at before. And that's what I'm going to show you guys next. If I can get this machine to sit in the spotlight. And I'm going to stop share and start video. So this machine here is an Olympia Report Electric. My estimation is that this machine is definitely mid to late 70s because of the keyboard. Unfortunately, I was not able to date it using the supplies that I have. This machine is an electric machine with an automatic return carriage. This machine has a keyboard that has a lot of mechanical keys, so very reminiscent of early mechanical keyboards, like keyboards for computers, as opposed to kind of the more touchy, less springy keys as we have now. But as you can see at the top there, it's still using the same type of typing mechanism that old typewriters had. Now, it's kind of hard to see here, but there's something else about this machine that, as a historian type of perspective, really stood out. It's a little gross, but you got to ride with me on this. So you're looking at this machine here, and you're looking, wow, what a nice beige machine. This machine was not originally designed as a beige machine. This machine was a white machine. Many of our offices in various parts of the country, way before any of these laws were enacted, were smoking offices. You would walk in, everybody would be puffing away. It is a nicotine-stained machine. And when we get to this time period, when there's a lot of these white gloss machines that are popping up, we get this discoloration because that was what was happening in the office. And so it's almost like that kind of historical, it historically hails back to that time when things were so different that we take for granted today. If I walk into an office today puffing on a cigarette, I don't think I'll last a minute in there. But it was so popular, whoever this writer was, maybe he was even a writer at home, that he just was breathing all over this thing. So it surely needs a good cleaning. And believe it or not, I bought this, a friend of mine and I are doing a typewriter swap So it's not my machine to clean. I am not as much into the electric machines as he is. But it's a good example to kind of show how those very traditional typewritery mechanics that we started with when I showed you a 102-year-old Oliver Standard visible typewriter have gone a long way and now are being integrated into an electrical software. Not electrical software, but an electrical mechanism. And some of the things that typewriters have now, or that typewriters used to have, still are important today, such as having good rubber for the platens. They are the same companies that will resurface a typewriter platen are the same companies that work on massive printing machines, because printers still use rubber to feed the paper. So much of even what we have today, not just in the terms of the design of the keyboard, but also the way we think about the way what our keyboard says. The tab button on your keyboard started with the tab button on a typewriter keyboard, where actual tabs, and if I bring back up my Remington, those actual tabs were what we use to be able to tab along on a typewriter. You can see right in there the actual tab sticking out. One of the tabs. So it's just so, and that's why, and I've been talking very much about these machines for this whole time, but that is why I just, as a collector, I just absolutely fell in love with them, because it's almost like when you study Latin a little bit and you go, wow, the word for writing, the word for aquatic, the word for virile are all words that started in this language. And it's almost like the analogous in terms of machines and office material. The way that our keyboards are designed, the way that we look at words on a page, all came from decades of these machines sculpting the way that the entire world ran. And that is, and now that I get to use them for poetry. So they get to have a new life. And typewriter collecting and being able to kind of buy a machine even and dive into the history of it, it's an extremely affordable entry into studying historical antiques. That Oliver I showed you before that types that can type prescriptions was less than $60. The electric typewriter I showed you was literally less than $20. This one was $60, but I bought it at a thrift store, and I was supporting a great local nonprofit while doing it. So it's almost like that. If you're thinking about, if you're intrigued by writing, you're intrigued by history, these machines are just they're the place to really learn and grow with both of those aspects. Now, I'd be glad to answer any questions. Again, I am coming from this as a collector's history, so I've learned these things in passing. Dates can sometimes be troublesome for me, but it's just so intriguing to have a little bank of knowledge of why typewriters are the way they are and why the office is the way it is today. So thank you so much.
Awesome. So we do have a couple of questions. So first off, we have a question on how did you actually get into working with typewriters? Like, what is your background? How did you become interested? Your career beforehand, your career now?
So my main career is not working with typewriters. My main career is I do consultancy and engagement for local nonprofits. I love connecting people together. But the reason why I got really so interested in them was because I started writing with them a lot more when I started doing my street poetry. So that was more of a writer's thing. I was disgruntled as a writer. I was writing part-time and I loved it, but I wasn't getting published anywhere. So I said, let me just take my poems to people. I have a typewriter. I can go out to the walking wall and type for people. And I said, hey, you want a poem? And I wrote a poem for somebody, and they thought it was so good that they gave me a tip, and the rest is kind of history with that. Once I started writing a lot more, and once I started buying machines, an antique store gets a machine. Likely that person at the antique store may not be a supreme expert in mechanics. They're not going to spend 6 hours working on a machine for fun like I would, which is a huge time sink, but I love it. I actually grew up, my dad taught me how to work on cars, and I don't make the salary to be able to buy and work on cars. I don't have a garage. So typewriters was a great analogous hobby to get into because it's all very similar mechanics, levers, gears, everything like that, except these typewriters won't necessarily explode on impact. Like it's a lot safer in some ways as well. So that was kind of where my expertise came in terms of repairing them. And then I just dove into the community. And the great thing about the typewriter community, and I'm going to put up my references here, because I did actually get to write a little references list of some places you can check some of the stuff out that I shared today. Where's my share button? Hold on a second, I need to share the screen button. The typewriter community is a very helpful, engaging community. As if Tiger King showed us anything, it's that there are certain collector groups that can be a little toxic. I have not found that with the typewriter community. They're very helpful, welcoming. This book actually is a book that I just prop all the time called The Typewriter Revolution. And it's all about not only how to get into machine typewriters, how to get interested in them, how to work on them, but also how people are using them today. So if you are intrigued at all enough that you feel like you want to learn more and dive deeper, this book, 100%. Or call me and I'll just talk your ear off all day about it. So that's kind of how I got started with them. It's just, working. And when you buy a machine from an antique collector, kind of going back to what I was saying before, and there's a screw missing, well, you don't want to have a big, pretty looking paperweight on your hand. So I like using them. So it forces me to engage with the machines, pull things apart, put them together, clean them up. I learned about that. A fun fact I'll add is that before, I think the quote I heard was before 1930. Hold on a second, I'm going to stop the share here. Before 1930, screws were not standardized. So the fact is if I lose a screw on this machine here, like if I misplace it, gets brushed under the rug, something like that, I have to call another person that owns one of these machines that they're parting out to get another part. And so relationships build. There's a couple of people I've met just solely because I go, hey, I have a machine and I need a part. Do you happen to have the part? And they're like, yeah, I can send you this and that and a couple of bucks. But so it's all about part sharing sometimes too. So that's kind of how I got into it.
Also, so we have another question. On your 1930 Royal typewriter, does it also have a ribbon like your others do?
I can put the ribbon in, and actually I can show you guys putting the ribbon in, because I just simply took out the ribbon because, fun fact, there's somebody out there selling rainbow colored ribbons, and I've been playing around with it. So there, I was recently doing a class. Oh, you just saw me walk around the room there. Here, let me switch the camera around so it's less of seeing me walking around. When I was doing a class for some kids that were learning how to write, and they were interested in learning how to write with typewriters, I pulled out the rainbow colored ribbon. But putting the ribbon in these machines is relatively simple. It does take a little bit of finesse. Hopefully the camera can demonstrate this. Maybe that might be a little better. You see here, kind of just sliding it into the slots there. Ribbon is very available. It's one of the most common questions I get. There are a lot of people selling typewriter ribbon. You can get ribbon like this for probably like 15 bucks, 30 bucks if you really want the good stuff. By the good stuff, I mean metal spools, because believe it or not, the type of spool will affect the typewriting quality to it. And there are manuals available still for these things. So if you're not sure how to put a ribbon in, it's all there. So, and that is how you install a new ribbon in less than 60 seconds. And if anybody has really not seen these things, the red and the black actually are two different ink colors. So you can type in red or you can type in black.
That's awesome. Another question we got is, are there differences in machines geared towards women aside from the colors?
There were colors was really the main thing. There were some keyboard key top arrangements that supposedly were designed so that a woman with fingernails would be, with like longer fingernails, would be able to better type on them. But I heard that it was kind of more like hokey and it really didn't actually go off the way that people wanted it to. It might have been more of an advertising hack. I'm trying to think. Sometimes in typewriter names, there is a typewriter that's literally called the Princess. I can't imagine that was on accident. It's a very colorful, flowery typewriter. There definitely is, but I'm not the person that knows enough about that. But it's a question that is worth kind of digging deeper on. And again, if you Google just a man by the name of Peter Weil, you'll come up, Peterweil, you'll come up with a social scientist that used to be a giant in the typewriter community. And he was kind of where I learned a lot more about how typewriter history was very much sculpted by women in the workplace.
Cool. Awesome. Okay, so we'll take one more question. And what is the oldest typewriter you have found?
That I found. I mean, that 1876 Shoals that I took a picture of is definitely the oldest one that I've that I have seen in person, and I think it's one of the oldest existing ones. I have, when it comes to actually being able to buy a typewriter, I've reached a point in, my jobs have been in transition, my other actual employments, but I've reached a point where I'm able to set aside some money, and my goal is to actually buy the oldest yet, within my budget, yet working, yet most unique typewriter to busk with. So my guess is that if everything goes according to plan, I will have something within the 1890s, early 1890s range, and be able to busk with that on the walking wall, which means that's literally nearly 130 years old. The 1918 Oliver is the oldest one that I've come within, buying, that I've been able to buy. So that's my oldest typewriter in my collection.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Joseph, for joining us today. And if anybody else has any other questions, please put them in the comments below, and I'll make sure to send them off to Joseph for future reference. So thanks again for joining us today. And I really appreciate everyone coming out and having fun with us tonight. I hope you all have a wonderful night.
Thank you again so much. And if anybody is interested in seeing more of these machines in action, you can just follow me at Walking Wall Poet on Instagram, or just Google Walking Wall Poet. You'll find my stuff. And most of these typewriters that you saw today, if you think one is really special, really called out to you, you can get a poem written on that typewriter. Like that, I can do that for you. So let me know what you're interested in, what piques your curiosity, and we'll make an artistic creation out of it. Thank you again, Taylor.
Thank you, Joseph, and everyone else. Have a wonderful rest of your night. See you later.